Our speaker today is John Forrester, author of several books involving bicycle transportation engineering with several other areas of engineering background. Some of the aspects of cycling are not necessarily obvious, and he has become a bit of a controversial figure in the cycling community. We are delighted to have him here today and to talk about things that need to be done, engineering for cyclists in America. John Forrester, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to talk about what I will call the management of bicycle transportation, which is the part of bicycle transportation that is most poorly done in America, or in many other places too, for that matter. But here we are, Silicon Valley. And I used to live here. I lived here for a long time. Don't live here now. All right. I'm going to start out by pointing out that the shape of cities and large urban areas has always been directed and limited by the type of transportation that is available to them. You can't grow a city if people can't get to the outer end or get from the countryside where all the food comes from into the city. You have to have transportation, and therefore, to a great extent, the shape and composition of cities has been dictated by the technology of transportation that has been available. Some of you may not like it. Some of you may think, well, we should stick with the bicycle age. Well, that'd be nice, wouldn't it? But we can't, unfortunately. The modern city started out, of course, in medieval times, or even way back before that. We're talking about horse travel for weights and foot travel for people, by and large. But the first assistance to this, aside from waterways, which were very important for those places that were on a waterway, and many of our cities, if you notice, started out life as ports, either ocean ports or river ports. But aside from the water, which was a very restricted resource, only available in some places, why, the first assistance to transportation came in the form of rail. First steam, then electric, diesel, whatever. Now, rail has particular characteristics. You have to put a lot of money into building a line which has high capacity, if you can find the traffic for it, which means, therefore, that rail lines got built along the best places for lots of traffic, which made sense, but they did not go everywhere. America tried to send rail lines all over the Middle West, the farmer lines, the Granger lines, and they're all dead and gone because there's not enough traffic in agricultural product to support a great number of very closely spaced rail lines. And then when you got to cities, rail carrying people, even at the start of the steam line, you also had horse-drawn streetcars, and later on, 1888 and later, you had electric streetcars, interurban lines and things like that. But even so, the capital costs were high, so that the number of lines was restricted, and they all had to go someplace that was useful, so they all went downtown. So you had a radiating star-shaped pattern of rail lines. Well, that worked fine because people grew up with it and the city developed around it. To get from one branch to another branch, you went into the central city and came out again on a different line. Lots of people had to do that on occasion, but they didn't do it every day. And between lines, you still had first horse-drawn traffic and later motor traffic, and of course, right Before motor traffic, you had bicycle traffic. And that traffic, which was slower than trains, but it filled in the gaps so that you could ride from one branch line to another branch line by bicycle, and it was good transportation. Or you could live somewhere that wasn't directly served by the rail line and get onto it, and you could go downtown to where your job was. Then the car came along and upset that whole pattern, because the car could go anywhere. And streets were much cheaper to build and maintain than rail lines, and the cars could use streets essentially without immediate charging for them. You paid for them in the end, but it was all distributed. So the car went anywhere, just like the bicycle did. Trouble is, the car went faster, it could carry more things or more people, and therefore it became suitable for general transportation use. And once that became true, suburbs grew up, and people traveled by car, whether it be to work, for social affairs, or educational affairs, or whatever, anywhere they wanted to in the city. And as a result of that, the economic importance of downtown dropped, and for many of the services, you found them growing up in the suburbs. So you had suburb to suburb travel going all over every which way. And you know that's what you have today here. Except, of course, San Francisco Bay has this great big hole in the middle called the Bay. And so everything is sort of strung out in like a necklace around it. That changes things a little bit, but not all that much. So you have a situation whereby free path travel is the norm, but it is made up partly of bicycle travel and, unfortunately, more so by automotive travel. And that has spurred the development of the modern city, and you'll find that something like 80% or more of America's growth since the start of the automobile era became very popular, shall we say. Started suburbia in 1950, if you want to look at it that way. That's not the earliest date, though. But something like 80% of the growth since then has been in suburbs, which cannot efficiently be served by mass transit. And therefore, your two choices are car or bicycle. That's what it amounts to. Well, there's lots of value in riding a bicycle. But you cannot expect that bicycle travel is going to take the place of very much of the automotive travel that's being made. Now, you all know that you're making trips that your neighbors think are silly, too far, too dangerous, whatever. And you know it can be done. Therefore, you know that quite a few of those neighbors could make trips. And indeed, it's worth persuading them when they can. But you also find that a whole lot of them make trips that you just really can't do by bicycle. And they get involved with families where they have linked trips. In other words, it's not this average trip distance is only 3.5 miles, the statistic that you see. It's because you get a whole bunch of 3.5-mile trips, and you end up, after work, before you get home with the kids, to having driven 16 miles or something, with a load as well. So there it is. Bicycling is going to be a method of transportation that's good for those who can and those who want. And it's good for your health. It's good for lots of things. It might even be cheaper too, Considering the price of bicycles these days, sometimes one wonders, but there it is. And bicycles will last a long time too. The oldest one I ride regularly I bought in 55, I think, and it's still going strong, but new wheels, new hubs, new cranks, new everything almost, and a new top tube too. Top tube broke, I had to fix that. All right, so what has happened to bicycle transportation in these years? Up to the 1960s, the motorists didn't worry about bicycle travel. It was kids, and they could be, looked after by their parents. They didn't vote anyway, too. And they didn't ride all those places, strange places. And beside which, the car was the coming thing. Bicycles were outdated. And along comes the turmoil of the 1960s, when due to what happens, you got a new suburban family. They moved out to Levittown in 1954 with one car and elementary school kids. Now, they still got only one car, but they got high school kids who have social lives, and they start riding bicycles. I mean, they've always had bicycles, but now they start to use them for transportation to get around. And then you got the political turmoil, the Vietnamese War and all this stuff, and people trying to stay in school longer and do various other things which prevented them from earning a whole lot of money. So here they are riding bicycles for more years than everybody else had expected. So by the late 60s, the motorists thought, they looked at this graph, it was called the bike boom graph. And the bike boom really lasted only from 1968 to 1969 and a half or something, But still, they called it the bike boom. They looked at this exponential curve and they said, my God, they're going to fill up our roads. They didn't realize, of course, you see, that the prerequisite to having all that many cyclists filling up your roads could only have occurred in bedrooms some 20 years earlier. And it hadn't, not to that quantity. So it was utterly pointless, but they got frightened. And they decided what to do about it. We'll keep these guys off to the edge of the road, beside which they're incompetent. Most of them are kids, and they don't know how to ride anyway, don't know how to drive properly, so we'll shove them off the side of the road. And California invented the first bike lane systems, designs in America. Not quite the first in the Western world, but the first ones that, as a result of our agitation against them, started to have as much science as we could apply to them and get rid of the worst dangers. But there it was. The motorists invented the bike lane system, and they invented it for their own convenience on the excuse that cyclists were too dumb. Did you know? Did you know that here you are, Stanford graduates and all that, did you know that straddling a bicycle destroys your brains? It turns you into children who don't know how to drive. Yeah. Well, so then comes the environmental group, and they believe all this stuff that the motorists have been telling them about being incapable of riding in traffic. And they say, oh, these bikeways, they weren't invented to shove us aside, keep us out of the way of the motorists. They were invented to make cycling safe for beginners. And at that point, we cyclists lost the battle because it was overwhelming political force came along and said, bikeways, that's the way to go. Well, is it? What advantages were claimed? One, they made cycling safe, or much safer, shall we say. You can't say safe arbitrarily. You look at the accident pattern, and at this time we first started getting decent statistics from a man named Cross in Southern California. And he showed that the straight-ahead cyclist being hit from behind by the straight-ahead motorist was, in his first study, 0.5% of all car-bike collisions. That was Santa Barbara County. And then he did a national study. And by the way, that Santa Barbara County, you'll never see a copy of it. I have a copy of it because I was at the meeting at which Cross presented it. And like a fool, I got up and said what I just said. This is the case against bikeways. Hence, no further copies have been available to anybody. Yeah, but anyway, he got a contract for a national sample, 4 different states representing different parts of the nation and more representative of the country. And there you might look at the figure, and it might be 2% or something like that. Depends whether you want to count daytime ones only or nighttime ones as well, where there are other complications, or whether you want to count rural ones, which are different from urban ones. Okay, small number. So the other claim was they're especially suitable for beginners. Now, when you ride in a city with a bike lane system, you're still going to have to ride on streets that don't have bike lanes, so you still need all the skills. That's not only part of it. When you are riding on a street with a bike lane on it, you have to have all the skills that you already have for riding on a normal road, and then sometimes, and inevitably, there are places wherever you put in a bike lane system, there are some places where it really shouldn't have been put in, but it was put in just to make continuity so that people don't get lost or whatever. And those places, you have to outwit the designers. So you got to know how to do that in addition to having your normal road skills. Well, and the other one was that, oh, this is anti-motoring, it'll reduce motoring. Even here, I'm going to say that I doubt whether you have reduced the motoring intake into Google by 1%. I doubt it. I may be wrong, okay? But all I'm going to say is that it's unfortunate that motoring is not going to be significantly reduced such that you're going to save significant amounts of oil or do away with significant amounts of highway or whatever as a result of the amount of bicycle transportation being done. It just doesn't have that capability. So we are stuck now for those people who choose to ride because it's good for them, either their health, their money, or quicker, or whatever. Or perhaps they work in a place where you can't get cars in, like many campuses. Okay. People who ride because they want to, and because they also, we're talking about America. You find that many people say, oh, yes, Dutch bikeways are wonderful. Dutch bikeways, and they got a 40, 50, 60% bicycle mode share in Amsterdam. Well, sure they do. It's a medieval city. It's a pre-automotive obsolete city. Isn't that a nice word? And where motoring is extremely difficult. Well, you can't park your car at home because there's no place to park it. You got to go find your parking place, wherever it was. And you get through narrow streets and cramped, slow traffic to get where you want to go, and you can't leave it there either. So you go park it somewhere else, and then you walk back. Well, sure, it's easier to get on a bike and trundle along at 6 miles an hour, because that's faster than what you've been going by car. Yeah, sure. That's not going to work in America, because in America, your competition is not hoping to be faster than walking. It's hoping to be not so much slower than motoring that it's going to stop you from doing it. So by and large, speed for many cyclists is important. If you're really short range, probably doesn't make much difference. But if you're going to have to travel the same kind of distances that I've had to travel, 11 miles or more each way, and sometimes 1,000 foot of climb, well, it makes a difference to how well you do it, and you're trying to do it fairly fast. You want good roads, you want good traffic to be with you, and that ought to be organized on a rational basis. What's the rational basis? Well, traffic on the roads operates according to the rules of the road for drivers of vehicles. You can say in shorthand, in some respects, the traffic laws. That's not exactly true, but the traffic laws have been written and worked over, so they try to represent the legally enforceable way of stating the principles by which traffic operates, except for a couple of them. If there's a path along there, you can't ride on the roadway. That's not one of the standard traffic rules, because if so, there'd be 18-wheelers over there, and they wouldn't want that, would they? So that's not the right kind of general rule that we're talking about. We're talking about rules for drivers of vehicles. And Those have been worked out. Now, you can say that they're fairly simple, and I'm going to give a quick run through. It's if you're using the road, you're entitled to use it. First come, first served. So that and that includes your stopping distance ahead of you, and a little bit of space around you, so that when you're rolling along the street that's protected by stop signs, motorist is not allowed to come right out in front of you. Okay, so you run into him. That's not allowed. Okay, next one is you ride on the right-hand side of the road. Ride on the left-hand side of the road, there are all kinds of horrible troubles, and every once in a while you read of a motorist who gets the wrong way on something and there's a big head-on smash. Well, you might not end up in a head-on motor-to-motor smash, but you aren't going to like seeing those headlamps shining at you. Okay, then between intersections, you're going to, in general, you're slower than most other traffic, so you try and stay right, let the fastest traffic go by, but you don't stay so far right that you endanger yourself, and now that depends on the kind of road. Some roads have just terrible ragged edges. You have to stay away from that. Some roads have nice curbs. Some roads have nice smooth gutter pans, although most aren't. I can remember the years when paving was restricted because of the World War II. We rode on the gutter pans because the concrete was smoother than the tar, which hadn't been maintained for years. Of course, that got fixed later on, and now we generally stay off gutter pans. Okay. Then, when you are approaching, when you are entering a roadway, you have to yield to traffic on that roadway. And particularly if that roadway is a bigger one than the one you're on, protected by stop signs, yes, or just simply when you're coming out of your driveway, which is nothing really big compared to the street, you have to look both ways and yield. Yielding means looking to see that nothing is coming so close as to be a danger. Then you can move. And that works true if you're moving laterally on the roadway too. You look over your shoulder, you look ahead. Oh, yeah, there you are. And lastly, when you are approaching an intersection, you figure that things are set up so that if people want to turn right, they're over by the curb. The people want to turn left, they're out by the middle of the road. And if you want to go straight, you're between the two. Okay? You follow those, and those rules are easy to comprehend and easy to follow. Traffic cycling, just like traffic motoring, is not difficult. Now, they'll throw a whole lot of stuff in your motor vehicle driving examination about what do you do about a green painted curb and a yellow painted curb. It doesn't matter to you, and it's not one of the driving principles anyway. I worked out those 6 principles because I was faced with the job of teaching children. For adults, they'd never worked it out. It worked that way, but they never said so. But I can teach 8-year-old children to ride properly on 2-lane residential streets following most of those rules. They don't need the multiple lane rule. Okay? And 5th graders, they can ride any kind of street except some of the very peculiar places where you get high-speed right-hand curves on you and things like that. Because those rules are simple to follow, simple to understand. And anybody who can play a game of soccer has got the mental and physical equipment to ride in traffic up to the level of which their maturity allows. Okay? So children do take a bit. Now, that's the way cyclists should operate, but our government and our society has opposed it. They've opposed it because the motorists wanted safety for their own children, who they did not teach to ride bicycles, and they wanted convenience too. And it's hard to separate, self-interest from other interests. It's hard to separate. They're all there, though. So for motorist convenience and the safety of their children, who they kept ignorant, they wanted to have a system set up so that people who didn't know how to ride properly could ride safely, and they never achieved it. They did things like teaching children to make left turns by riding along the road, and of course, smash bang, because they hadn't looked behind. As a result of me saying for years that cyclists could look over their shoulder, one of the safety organizations of government let a contract to see whether that was true or not. I mean, can you imagine spending money on a research project for such an obvious conclusion? But the government did. That just tells you what society thinks. Okay? So, we've got this system whereby a bunch of people, and a lot of people who would like to see more cycling and less motoring, say we need to have more of bike lanes, bike paths, etc. And they want more of a system which was invented by motorists to discriminate against them on the basis that they were incompetent. That's not a rational way to run a bicycle transportation program. A rational bicycle transportation program will be set up on the assumption that we can teach cyclists, or at least most of them, one way or another. We can expect that they will obey the rules of the road. And if you notice, there are no traffic laws that contradict the rules of the road. Some of them, like saying, we don't let you ride anywhere except right next to the curb, or we won't let you ride on the road at all. You gotta roll on that path. But the traffic experts knew they wouldn't ever dare write a law that said cyclists have to collide with motorists by doing something different. So, okay, we've always therefore legally expected it, even though socially we didn't. Well, that's the tangle that we're in. What we need to be able to do is to convince government and the motoring establishment, to use a shorthand term, that they should really expect cyclists to operate according to the rules of the road, and they should provide roads which are suitable for that activity, depending on how much of it there is around. I mean, after all, none of us here are expected to ride up and down 101, right? Because it's a freeway and because there are plenty of surface streets around. On the other hand, you cross Donner Summit, nowadays, particularly in winter, when you can't go over the old road because it's all snowed in, they don't plow it out anymore, you go over considerable sections of I-80. But they're out in the country, and you're just riding along on the shoulder. It doesn't matter. Same thing in the Salinas Valley coming up from San Luis Obispo. There are quite a few places where there are really the nearest farm roads, they don't go the same direction as the highway does. You have to go zigging, zagging, and get lost. And they let you ride the highway shoulder. Okay, that's fine. But by and large, government should expect, and it says it does expect, that cyclists will be found on any road. And that means to say, things like parallel barred drain grates going the wrong way. I have seen a few of those in the last few years in Southern California. But I thought they were all gone, you know, because people knew they were dangerous. These were new construction too. Ooh. And there were lawsuits as a result. Somebody fell in them. And then you have just plain smooth surfaces. You want traffic lights that work for you. You want more right turn only lanes, because right turn only lanes get the right turning motorists off to your right before you get to the corner where they turn across you. So people say, oh, well, we don't like right turn only lanes. Well, if people in cars are going to turn right, they're going to turn right. It's better to have them merge right with a safe way to do it, because they can go ahead of you or behind you, than to turn right across you. So more right turn only lanes. I would say more left turn lanes with protected left turn signals. The highest frequency motorist-caused car-bike collision is the left-turning motorist hitting a straight-through cyclist. And if that motorist is waiting for green arrow, he won't get that green arrow until you've seen a red stop sign and you're stopped. And same way, if you want to turn left, when you make a left turn with that left turn arrow, you know you're protected too. So more of that kind of cyclist useful traffic improvement is worth getting government to do. But they they don't want to do it for just cyclists, particularly because they say, oh yes, but you're supposed to be over here on the bike lane. And then they quote all the enormous numbers of people who say, oh yes, haven't you seen this review? Why, 72.34% of the people who answered this question said, yes, they would ride to work if they had a bikeway. I mean, you know, it's hard. You see these all the time, and not one of them makes any statistical sense at all. So we need to have, in addition to that, legal and governmental action. We need to have rational social acceptance of the fact that any person who's going to be mature enough to ride a bicycle on the streets can also be trained to do it properly. I'm not talking about 4-year-olds. Now, I had a 4-year-old daughter, and she had a pedal car, and she wore the tires clean off it because she was wild. But I wouldn't have let her on the street with a pedal car, you understand? But on the other hand, 6-year-old and 7-year-old children, my children and others, I've taught them to ride properly. I've taught classes of students, 3rd grade, therefore they were approximately 8 years old, some a bit younger, you know, but it was summertime. They either just left the 3rd grade or they were just going into the 3rd grade, some of each. And I can teach them in 15 class hours at a pupil-teacher ratio of 1:7. I had a bunch of assistant lady cyclists, mothers mainly, to teach. This is up, not Mountain View, just what's the next place north of Palo Alto? Menlo Park. Is in Menlo Park. And we taught kids of that age, and we also, in different groups, we taught kids in the 5th grade as well. And we taught them so they could ride on any 2-lane residential street, the age of 8, and they would operate better than any group of adults, general populace adults I've measured in any city I've been in. And I've measured quite a few of them. It's fairly easy to do. It's like a driving test, you know? And only you follow them along on a bicycle, and instead of this thing here, which I have here, you have instead a tape recorder with a little button, so that when you see somebody riding along and you want to comment on it, make a comment, you push the button, and you take off, and you push the button. You can do 8 hours of research, and you come out with 40 minutes of tape. That's practical, you know? And you write the scores down afterwards. So it can be done. And if we have a combination of rational social policies and rational government policies with respect to proper cycling, you'll probably get more cycling, which is good, because you're not going to force people to do it. People are going to get into it because they find it's good for them. That's good. And you will have fewer troubles, and you'll probably have a lower accident rate. So that's what I'm saying is necessary to be done to significantly improve bicycle transportation in the American scene, in the modern city. Question?
To provide perhaps a counterpoint, in European countries like, say, the Netherlands, you have fairly complicated infrastructure specifically for the bicycles. You have networks of bike paths and so on, which are far more than anything I've seen in the U.S. Is there a problem with that?
Okay, the question is the classic comment. I have to repeat the questions for what's going on. The question is is the classic comment that they have much more cycling in places like the Netherlands, particularly, and some other Northern European countries, than they have here. Now, the Netherlands, all the cities there were started medieval times or before. Narrow streets designed for horse-drawn traffic, and not a whole lot of that either. And they have grown up, they became rich in their colonial era, spice trade and things like that, and you got lots of fancy buildings and things, but still on the same rather cramped walking scale distances. And then, by the time the cars started to become popular in America, Holland was again a poor nation. Motoring didn't come to Holland on a mass scale until 10 or 15 years after the close of World War II. So they suddenly had the problem what to do with the cars that we can now afford and want. But they also found that in the older cities, motoring was very difficult. And there are two sets of stories. One set says, yes, we know that there's motoring coming and our streets are very narrow and all that, but motoring is a coming thing, so we're going to push the cyclists aside. And the other one says, oh, these cars are all going to be terribly dangerous, so we'll have to make facilities to save cyclists. Frankly, I place a little more faith in the first explanation than the second. But in any case, you have a place where you have short distances, slow speeds, and where not simply slow speeds when motoring, but as I've said, the actual effort and the acts required to make a motoring trip in Amsterdam are just very complicated, because your car isn't where you want it, and where you can leave it is not where you want to go. So that competitively speaking, cycling is much, much more used. They consider cycling to be better than walking, which is quite true. It's faster than walking, and in that climate and those places in that distance, it is not all that much sweat making or whatever. So it works for them. But I will say that the rural paths in Holland, they were the first bikeways built, and they were built to accommodate the rural farm workers who were going to slow down the intercity cars, the cars on the rural roads. And of course, what happened? What happened in America with Ford's Model T? The farmers all bought it because they lived out in the country and needed it. Same thing happened in Holland. So now we have paths which are wonderful for touring, but they're not used by the people who were designed for. Somebody other question? Yes.
Yeah, so I'm Swedish. I biked my whole life, and I lived in Amsterdam for 3 years. And I have to say, I live in San Francisco now, and I don't feel comfortable cycling here. I don't think it's safe enough, and I'm kind of sad that we haven't addressed the safety aspect too much in terms of no people is going to get out here in mass unless it's safe and perceived safe. And I have to say, the traffic is not safe. You have buses on all the sides when you're biking, roads, you can't be on the side because people open the doors, cars are double parked everywhere and so on. So,
well, yes. Question refers to the intensity of traffic in America being unsafe for cycling. Well, yeah, I mean, stay out of the door zone, and don't run into double parked cars, just go around them. But I agree with you. San Francisco is an extremely congested city for motor traffic. However, here's the point. There's nothing practical that we could do about it that would improve the situation for cyclists. There's no extra room for bike paths on the Amsterdam model. And if you did have them, cyclists would be, as with the traffic there, they would have to go slow and be easy. Now, I've ridden quite a lot in San Francisco when I lived up in this area. I lived in the Bay Area from 1940 to 1998. Mostly, not entirely. And I've ridden all over these places. And it's not, if you do it right, it's not as bad as you say. And what I'm saying as well, the supposed improvements end up making it worse rather than better, which is a shame. Now, I agree that traffic could be better behaved in San Francisco. Sure, I agree with that.
There is a few points which makes it safer, and one is slowing down traffic. So Stockholm, for example, in the inner city has been slowing down traffic by making car lanes narrower and more difficult to navigate. So it means people slow down, people don't feel stressed as much driving cars anymore, and everyone is safer who's on a slower pace.
Well,
and that is practical things which can be done, and I don't see that these other approaches being taken. Just saying that cyclists should behave on the road in San Francisco, that's not going to help improve bike safety really.
The matter of narrowing lanes versus speed is definitely unsettled. Some measurements show it does slow motor traffic. Some people say it doesn't. But in America, you've got, except for places like San Francisco, you tend to have much greater distances and people are moving faster simply because that is the kind of distance they've got. Now, we had some other questions back there.
I had a question about your rational principles for cycling. You use the word yield, but ever since stop signs have proliferated all over the continent, and the police have turned into a bunch of cement heads in enforcing stopping and stops, it's like, you know, a fundamental thing you enjoy as a bicyclist. Like,
Yes, I understand. The perennial stop sign question. Okay. Now, you speak to any traffic engineer who knows his subject, and he will say, those damn politicians, they make us put stop signs every place where they shouldn't. And they're referring to political pressures for doing it. I cycled 1,500 miles in England in 1985 with my lady friend, and as I recall, we saw 2 stop signs in 1,500 miles. Yield signs in quite a few places. And you speak to any traffic engineer who's responsible, and he knows, but we've gone stop sign crazy. And as a result of that is the California stop, which is treat it like a yield sign. And you see motorists doing it all the time, even in times when they shouldn't, which is unfortunate. Yes?
I had a question about bicycle pedestrian safety, in particular moving pedestrians and bicycles into the same separate roadway.
Never. Yes, you see, Sawyer Camp Trail. You know where that is? It's up, it's just alongside Crystal Springs Reservoir. There's a little sign up there saying it's a beautiful road. And by the way, this was a public road from 1849, I think, on until 1995 or some date like that. It was a public road. And now they got signs up on it because it's no motor traffic, because it's part of the park, and they have the Skyline Freeway, I forget, 280 along there, have a speed limit sign, 15 miles an hour. Yeah. And there's a very famous trail alongside, it was a railroad route, along the northern edge of Lake Washington, which is just behind the lake that's behind Seattle. And it's why it's sort of in the same sense like the San Francisco Bay with Marin County on the top and San Francisco where Seattle is, or the other way around. Anyway, so all the way around the north edge of that water, they had railroad tracks which got abandoned. They had a few houses, beachfront houses, so to speak, but not very many of them because not many people wanted the trains there and all that and stuff. So there's almost no cross traffic. They turned that into a bike path, Burke-Gilman Trail. And it feeds University of Washington and a bunch of other things. Very famous. And they have speed limit signs on that. League of American Wheelmen held their annual convention there, about 1981 or something, I forget now. And we on the board were up there going for rides and saying, this is where the organizers, the local organizers, have scheduled rides. So we went out and started coming back along there. And, well, you see, they all said, it's marvelous, absolutely safe and all that. So I got out and tried to proceed at a quite safe speed, 22 miles an hour, shall we say, on the road. No trouble at all. No trouble at all. And they followed me, and afterwards they were saying, "You should not have ridden so dangerously." And I said, "I wasn't riding dangerously. I was very careful, but I was being much more careful and much more alert than I have to be on the roadway. I mean, yeah, all those damn pedestrians, they'll knock you down." Yes?
You discussed the need to educate cyclists about the motor vehicle code, and that if we educated cyclists, everybody would be safer. But it seems that one of the principal benefits of having striped roadways and having bicycle lanes is that it educates vehicle traffic. There could be a bicycle on this road, and I cycle in San Francisco on the bikeways following the motor vehicle code because they're safer on those roads, because those drivers have been a little more sensitized to the fact that there could be a bicycle. Pay attention when you turn right in your very large SUV.
I will ask you, have you seen, oh yes, repeat the question. Bike lanes sensitize motorists to the possibility that they might have to avoid a cyclist. I will ask you, have you ever seen any scientific demonstration of this claim? I never have. I don't think it exists.
Have there been any studies one way or the other?
Well, the bike lane proponents, of which you may be one or so, have advanced this argument for 35 years, and they've had some hundreds of studies published on sort of related subjects. And they've never demonstrated a hoot worth of solid evidence that any of the claims which I have mentioned happens to be true. If they can't find something in 35 years of quite a lot of money, whereas people like myself, who for no money at all have, and not all that much time, have simply applied standard traffic engineering principles and our own cycling experience and the cross statistics, which we were paid for by government until they learned better. Why, if we come up with different conclusions, I think it's highly unlikely that any further effort directed to finding scientific support for bikeways in general, whichever kind they are, is likely to turn up enough evidence to reverse the balance of evidence that now exists.
So should we give up on educating drivers?
I'm sorry?
Should we give up on educating drivers?
No. You should do the best that you can for that. Yeah.
I have a question on from a remote site when you're done with this.
Oh, okay. No, I think that society should be alerted to the importance and the ease and the results to be expected by training cyclists to operate properly. As I said, 15 class hours, even for young kids, and they will ride on any street that you think they might be suitable for riding, and do it better than the average adult population, much better than the average adult population today. If you can get that through, and you can get the organizations that would support that. I'm not saying the public schools, they got too much on their minds, and this is a specialized thing, not general public. If you can get the people who are interested in cycling to operate that kind of class and persuade people to come, that's very good, the best thing you can do. Sorry, one moment. Yes.
You have a remote site.
Yes?
Oh, thank you. I was wondering if you'd be able to compare rates of cycling on populations in the U.S. with traditional bicycle infrastructure facilities that have shown a significant increase in the number of riders. I'm thinking in particular of Portland, Oregon, and Davis, California, and compare that to populations who have participated in bicycle safety courses like you mentioned in Menlo Park.
Ah, yes, the perennial question, do bikeways demonstrate increased? And he quoted Davis. Well, the catch about Davis is that the cycling population has gone down. No, here's what happened to Davis. Davis was the agricultural experimentation station until 1965 or some date like that. And then the statewide university plan was to grow that to a standard campus of 20,000 students in this little town in the middle of the Sacramento Valley. Yes, they were greatly worried. And indeed, they got lots of cyclists. But they would have had lots of cyclists anyway, regardless of what they did about them. And there are, again, two stories about that. Yeah, you speak to Bob Summer and Dale Lott, and they say, oh, we were all out for protecting cyclists against this influx of motorists coming in with the school. And you speak to people who hang around city politics for a while, and they said, yeah, we were really worried about having our streets all plugged up with all those student cyclists. Both sides of the story. But ever since the installation of the free bus service around the UC Davis campus, cycling has dropped, regardless of facilities. And here's the point. When you are a student in Davis and you can't park your car on campus, how are you going to get there? You're going to ride a bicycle or take the free bus nowadays. But before that, you rode a bicycle. It didn't matter in Davis, of all places, whether there were special facilities or not. So, and a couple of those facilities are very weird, but that's beside the point. And there was another city mentioned, Portland, Oregon. And nobody has ever demonstrated that their citywide program for reducing motoring and increasing cycling has produced the result it has, which is true. There's some result there, but nobody's ever produced it. It was the bikeways that did it rather than all the other things that they were doing. No, in other words, too many confounding causes. Question back there?
So when I rode in today, about half the ride was on what's called a bike path, or bike way, something like that, which is basically just a road that's sort of extra wide on the second lane to the right, but no actual stripe.
Oh.
And then about another half of it was on actual bike lanes that were striped. I really appreciate the fact that I have more room so that I don't have to kind of weave in and out of the cars to avoid getting hit by the doors. Is it just the stripe on the road that you object to, or is it the actually having more room in the right-hand lane on the road?
Well,
Repeat the question.
yes, the question is wide outside lane versus bike lane with stripe. Well, you said you had more room. All I will say to you is, you got the room you use. Just ride along and you got that room. And the motorists will go around you because they have to. They're not going to ride smack over you and risk all those possibilities. Might scratch their paint too, you know. But the point is that the stripe confuses people's minds about what's right to do. Whereas a wide outside lane, which is a technical name for what you were saying, the wide outside lane, does not introduce this extra element of confusion. And it indicates that, which is true even if the stripe is there, you still need all your smarts. So the stripe is bad because it decreases the propensity to learn how to do it properly, at the same time as making people confused, if you understand me. Yes. Question?
Yeah, I kind of feel that you're blaming the victim by saying that cyclists are not good enough. And I also felt that you kind of dismissed very lightly what's being done in Europe, where essentially their solution to congestion is to say, we need to reduce cars, whereas the solution here is to say, oh, we need more roads.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to think of how to phrase your question so it gets in through the microphone. And I don't really understand it. I'm sorry.
Well, by saying that cyclists are unsafe because they're not good enough,
Oh.
it takes the responsibility away from the car drivers. I feel that there should be...
Oh, okay. All right. He's talking about the relative responsibility of motorists versus cyclists regarding their results of their behavior. First place, if you look at the standard way of cataloging car-bike collisions, you find that more than half of them have been caused by motorists, have been caused by cyclists, less than half of them by motorists. If you then start to looking at what kind of evasive actions could be made or what kind of secondary causes there were, and you realize that there are lots of things that cyclists should not have done or could have done to avoid it. And this results in what I'm going to term the accidents per mile rate for different groups of cyclists. The general average population rate per mile. I forget exactly what, something like 113 accidents by one way per 1,000 miles or something, 100,000 miles. But in any case, the ratio I do know, and that's this, that when you consider people who are much more likely to ride properly because they have been schooled by their club cycling friends or whatever and had more experience, you find the accident rate goes down by 75% regarding car-bike collisions. And that indicates that regardless of who's causing it, the cyclists have the ability to avoid 3 out of 4. And I think even though the exact values are not all that exact, I think the ratio is so overwhelming, it indicates the value of skill.
Assuming we follow your basic principles and educate the cycling populace or a sufficient percentage of the cycling populace to follow the traffic laws as you described, how do we then mitigate the next problem I would see as a big hurdle, which is, this morning I commuted in with 2 other people, and we were essentially, as you say, taking lane when appropriate, driving as a vehicle, as a clump of 3 bikes. But at more than one instance, we ended up with a car behind us who wanted to proceed past us, but could not, given the roadway conditions, and was borderline violently opposed to our position in the road. What political forces, what social forces, how do we influence the public opinion, if you will, of the motoring population?
Okay, question refers to the greater tendency, perhaps, as postulated, of vehicular cyclists to delay motorists and others. The question I will ask you, sir, is were you riding in line or abreast, the 3 of you?
At that particular point, we were riding 2 in 1, so someone abreast and someone in line.
I understand. I would say that in the kind of situation in urban riding where you are, I would ride alongside a buddy only if I was pretty sure that there was plenty of room for other traffic to get past us. Otherwise, I'd single up, which helps some. And, of course, here's the point. It doesn't matter whether there's a bike lane that's striped there or not, because there you are. You're taking the space regardless. So I see that it doesn't make that much difference. But, again, if society starts to adopt a rational thought about cycling, which says you should operate according to the rules of the road, and you're legitimate doing it, then they're going to accept a moderate amount of delay that's not forced on them gratuitously, if you understand what I'm saying. And sure, it's public relations, but we all need that one too. But the public motorist has that belief because he's been trained that cyclists should never be in his way. See? And you've got to overcome that. Another one.
What role do you think law enforcement should play in educating cyclists and motorists as to how to behave with each other?
Question is the extent of law enforcement activity in the education of the driving public. I will say that they really don't have that kind of function. Traffic laws are not written to educate people, they're written to be enforceable. The job of the traffic police is to even-handedly enforce the real traffic laws, and not the couple of nasty ones I mentioned, which shouldn't be on the books, and against all people who disobey them. And that is their function. You can't expect enforcement officials to be any good at teaching. They aren't trained that way, and the words they use don't work.
We need to wrap this up now. John, thank you very much for coming. And
you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you.